In last week's episode, we talked about critical thinking and critical empathy. Let's see what you had to say. Before we get to specific comments from last week's video, there are a couple things that I want to cover up front, just broader questions that some people have been asking. And the first is, now that Idea Channel is done, where can you go to find me? So I have some answers for that question. First and foremost, you can find me on Twitter. That is the place that I am the most active on a day-to-day basis. You can also find me on Instagram and Tumblr, all at the same username, @MikeRignetta. But Twitter is probably the place that is the best for, announcements of new projects, things that I'm working on, stuff like that. I also have a personal YouTube channel that has been a little quiet for the last couple years, but now that Idea Channel is done, I would say that it is highly likely that I will end up making at least a few things over the next little while that end up there, so we'll put a link to that in the description as well. I make a podcast that's called Reasonably Sound. It is a podcast about the science and theory and culture of all things audio. You can think of it kind of like Idea Channel. We talk about theory and popular culture and philosophy, but we always start from something that is audio related. That is going to be the thing that I focus on immediately following Idea Channel. Some people have asked whether the end of Idea Channel will mean I get more time to spend on Reasonably Sound, and the answer to that is an unequivocal yes, so I'm very excited to dive back into that. You can listen to that anywhere that you listen to podcasts, except for the time being. Spotify, that's complicated for some reason, but I'm working on it, I promise. I actually even recently started uploading Reasonably Sound episodes to YouTube, so you can subscribe to Reasonably Sound's YouTube channel. It's a still image, it's the logo with audio underneath it, but I'm slowly uploading the back catalog, so you can even subscribe to the Reasonably Sound YouTube channel. You can also see me every Friday on Crash Course Mythology. That is gonna continue for the next little bit, but I have also heard on good authority that Mythology will not be the last Crash Course series that I work on, so I'm very excited to continue working with the awesome folks over at Crash Course on another series, sometime in the near future. Very excited. And in the short term, I'm also going to be doing a YouTube live Q&A with the folks at PBS Rewire next week on Tuesday in the mid-afternoon Eastern time. So I'll put some links to that on our social media once I have them. So yeah, that's next week, live Q&A. Come hang out, ask some questions, see some questions get answered. I'm gonna be talking about, what it was like to make Idea Channel, what I'm thinking about doing next, what it's like to end a YouTube show, and I imagine, whatever else people want to know about. The second question that a lot of people have asked is, where can you go to fill the Idea Channel shaped hole in your heart and your life? And I would love to provide some recommendations for you, but I also want to provide a caveat to those recommendations, which we've provided before. So this is a review for some of you who have watched the Q&A video. In a lot of ways, Idea Channel was a deeply unfocused show. We followed our whims, we made episodes about whatever happened to interest us on a week-to-week basis, and so I think for better, a lot of the channels that I'm gonna recommend are much more focused. There is a thing that they do, they're very good at it, and their editorial voice is much more clear than ours was. So while there isn't one place that you can go that does the kind of thing that Idea Channel does, there is a complement of shows that do similar work. So we'll put links to all of these in the description, but I just want to shout out specifically Ollie from PhilosophyTube, Dan Olson from Foldable Human / Folding Ideas, and Lindsay Ellis. Vanessa from Braincraft, Matt from Spacetime, and Kelsey from Infinite Series also tend to talk about some of the larger science-based questions that we discussed occasionally here on Idea Channel. So if you don't know their work, I would definitely recommend checking them out, but also like the entire PBS Digital Studios oeuvre. I can't recommend it highly enough. And I'm not just saying that because Digital Studios produced Idea Channel. I really do stand by Digital Studios as like one of, if not the best MCN on YouTube. So just, anything they produce, I like it, it's good. Extra credits for video games, definitely Kyle Colgren for movies, Evan, the nerd writer, for sort of general smartness about things of cultural import. And I've said it before, I'll say it again, I know it's weird, but Vox, the Vox Cultural Explainers, are so good. They're a pleasure to watch. I highly recommend them. And also outside of YouTube, I want to recommend several podcasts, specifically On the Media, The Philosopher's Zone, Reply All, and 99% Invisible, all of which are podcasts that tend to look slightly deeper at the world. So we'll put links to those in the doobly-doo as well. Okay, now that the sort of general questions have been answered, on to specific comments. On last week's comment response video, not on the full episode, BigBadWolf left a comment asking if we could talk about some of the things that we failed at, saying that, you know, the final 3 episodes were about, you know, the things that were good, the things that worked, but what were we not successful at? And, you know, to be perfectly honest, I think that we failed at some point or another on every point that we talked about in the finale episodes. And I want to be clear that these final episodes are in no way meant to be like a victory dance. It's not like a celebration of how smart and good and cool we are. I think there are episodes that we made that fell short of all of the expectations that we had for ourselves. And, you know, some of them we fell really, really short. Some of them, you know, we only fell kind of short. But I think that, you know, we are guilty of, you know, in a lot of places of not being empathetic, of not inviting a broad cross-section of people to have ideas, of, you know, treating things not with the kind of importance or respect that we could have. And so I think that what we wanted to do with these final 3 episodes is to talk about what we tried to do and talk about why we think those things are important. But I also want to be super clear that I don't think we hit the nail on the head every single time. And that, you know, you can go back and watch the Idea Channel catalog, and I think that, you know, that will pan out. CricketStyleJ gives us a thumbs down for encouraging credulity and says that this is one of the worst things we can be doing with our influence. I think it's probably pretty clear that I disagree, but I also want to point out that this is something that Elbow talks about in his piece, in the methodological believing game paper, where he talks about how we have this really clear idea of how to doubt and what it means to doubt something. That, you know, when we doubt an idea, it does not mean that we are completely dismissing it. It means that we are performing this orientation that helps us refine it, that helps us figure out whether or not it's worth anything, that helps us figure out if it has any problems. And that doubting is part of the process of making an idea that you might actually want to have better, but that we don't have that for believing. And that we tend to conflate believing with accepting, and that we don't have this same sort of methodological idea for believing that we do for doubting, that you can believe something in order to figure out how it's put together, in order to figure out whether or not it has any salvageable facets, you know, believing something in order to see its weaknesses from inside. That we just think that if you believe something, you must accept it. And, you know, this is like, there's that very famous quote, you know, the sign of an intelligent mind is being able to entertain an idea without accepting it, or, you know, some such thing. And I think, you know, it's hard. I would stipulate that it is difficult because it feels like we are encouraging just believe everything. But I think that's because of, more than anything, because of our intellectual tradition and how we have come to treat the idea of believing something. But I just want to be clear that the believing game by no means indicates uncritical acceptance. It is believing in the same version that doubting, you know, helps critical thought. This is something that Connor Fields also talks about, that, you know, it seems like it is much more fruitful to be hard-nosed and, you know, looking for the cracks in things, looking for the flaws is how political discussions move forward. It's how knowledge is developed, but that it is much harder to learn tolerance and to attempt to be tolerant of ideas that are unexpected or that are the opposite of yours, to sort of get within them to understand how they work. And I think, yeah, this is an effect of our intellectual tradition, and I think it's also a sort of an idea that for you to believe an idea is, you know, unconnected from this idea of accepting it, but that it is also, like, I think a lot of times people feel people feel like they're like poisoning themselves, or like they're showing some sort of vulnerability by momentarily taking on the ideas of their opponents. But I think that, you know, the people who do the most interesting intellectual work are people who are able to sort of see things from both sides, and who are able to play this game of believing things. So yeah, I want to just emphasize again, I recognize how difficult it is, but that's, you know, part of the game, I guess. So now that we've talked a little bit about the separation between believing and accepting, we're ready to discuss some of the stuff that Timothy McLean, No One of Interest, and a bunch of other people asked, which is sort of about the limits of the believing game and where they exist, if they even do. So a lot of people recognize that, you know, it's important and useful to have an open mind, but as a lot of people said in the comments, not so open that your brain falls out. And I think that that's kind of funny. And that, you know, people brought up these cases of, you know, is it worth accepting? Is it worth believing, playing the believing game with the thoughts of white supremacists, or, you know, like other just terrible people, like the bad element. And this is something that Peter Elbow talks about, and I would say that it is even maybe the focus for him of the believing game. He talks a lot about entering into otherwise reprehensible ideas in order to perhaps find some, what I believe he calls unexpected virtue. And I got a lot of thoughts about this that are gonna be hard to summarize quickly and off the cuff, but I'm gonna try. So I think the first big question that you can ask about the way Elbow describes the believing game for trying to find unexpected virtue in reprehensible ideas is whether or not you want to use it, whether or not you want to like weaponize it, or whether or not you want to use it in order to expand your own understanding of the world. And the way that those two uses look in comparison to one another is that, you know, you can inhabit momentarily some terrible idea so that you can understand why someone holds it. You can then, through that understanding, know more about them, their position, and the world, and that is an end in and of itself. The other use is to inhabit some vile position so that you can understand why someone has it, so that you can then argue against it. So that you can pass what is called the ideological Turing test, that you are able to effectively communicate someone's position back to them in such a way that indicates to them that you very clearly understand where it is they're coming from. And this is something that in their comment, Andres Arancio talks about, this idea that, you know, playing the believing game with people is sometimes a way to allow them to be open to persuasion, because if they know that you understand where they're coming from and you fully understand their position, then they may be open to commentary on that position. The place that Elbow comes from, and also I just want to say, I'm going to put some links to some sort of arguing rhetoric and like ideological Turing test things in the description. There are these two articles that I think about all the time with regards to communicating someone's beliefs back to them. So we'll put some links to that in the description. But the place that Elbow comes from when he talks about the believing game is he's an English professor, and the believing game is born out of this idea that when a student goes through a workshop, they've written something, they have people comment on it. His students aren't allowed to argue. When someone gives them feedback and they say they didn't like something, or something didn't work for them, something seemed bad or misguided or disorganized, whatever, the student's not allowed to explain why that reasoning is wrong. They have to just accept it. And he encourages them to believe this position that seems combative, that could seem wrong, that could seem vile or reprehensible, you know, because it's someone commenting on your work. So he expanded it from there into a larger theoretical framework. Now, to be super clear, we tended to use the believing game in a very different way to forward what we talked about in the episode, Todd de Stichter's idea of critical empathy, that instead of inhabiting vile ideas in order to find what about them might be virtuous, we would inhabit unexpected ideas, or positions that would be very hard for us, given our background, given our life experiences, to have ourselves, and then chose to believe those things. And I think that there is another kind of usefulness to that. That usefulness is not about trying to inhabit something to argue against it. It is definitely more about, for us at least, it was about trying to inhabit something to understand it, to have a larger understanding of the world, and to use it to broaden our perspectives. So there is a way in which you could argue that we played the believing game with things that we were already predisposed to believe, but it was in doing it that we were able to, I think, attempt to just understand what it's like to, be someone who's not us, what it's like to have differing experiences of media, the media landscape, and technology. And I think that's related to our larger mission on Idea Channels, that we wanted to figure out how to celebrate things. We wanted to figure out how to be excited about people's experiences of media. We only ever sort of waded into very serious, very contentious territory, every once in a while. But for the most part, we wanted to figure out what it was like for different kinds of people who were different fans of things, what their experiences of those things are like. And so we used the believing game in order to do that. So, I mean, in one sense, I think there kind of isn't a limit to the believing game, as long as you are able to separate this idea of believing and accepting. I think that, Peter Elbow would say, it is about trying to get into the worst, sort of most vile mindset, just to try to find out what unexpected thing you might discover. We tended to use it a different way. And I think, which way you might prefer, just probably has a lot to do with your predisposition and the kind of work you want to do. So, yeah. I would also recommend reading. I mean, I don't love everything about Elbow's piece. There's stuff that he says that I completely disagree with, and I think that there are ways that he justifies his ideas that are less than great. But the piece itself is still a really interesting one. It has lots of great ideas in it. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I played the believing game with the believing game piece and found some unexpected virtue. Alice Powell asks, what I think is probably a joke question, but I do really like it, and it actually made me think a lot about the nature of Idea Channel. They want to know whether or not we could consider Idea Channel a kind of sports show, because we've been playing the believing game. And I would say that, if someone wants to do an Idea Channel style episode about Idea Channel, asking whether or not it is, because we've played the believing game, a sports show or a game show, I would definitely be interested in watching that. But I do want to point out that this is another thing that Elbow talks about, this idea that, calling it the believing game is a way for him to communicate the fact that it is a thing to be played, and that it is a kind of game, or not folly, but it has an unseriousness to it, because it makes it a little bit more approachable to play this game with ideas that you might fundamentally disagree with, right? You're gonna play with them, you're gonna play the game, you're not going to seriously consider them and see what merit some potentially terrible idea has. And I think that's one of his ideas that I really like, and a thing that I think is maybe you can almost get that sense through thinking through what the believing game is, and hearing it described. But I also want to talk a little bit about how that relates to how we played it on Idea Channel. When we started Idea Channel, I think we were very excited about the possibility of covering any idea. That, because the show starts with here's an idea, we can talk about basically anything, and it, we were excited about the possibility of exercising that proverb of an intelligent mind being one that can hold an idea without accepting it. But it became clear really quickly that even though we start the show with here's an idea, and we considered it very speculative at the beginning, that we're just, throwing things out there and see what people think about them, that the audience would attribute whatever we talked about to me. And that no matter what we discussed, it would tend to be the case that people thought it was something that I thought was the case, or that I truly believed. And so then it became a way to, it became a process of figuring out how to play the believing game with things that I was comfortable having attributed to me and my person, my beliefs about the world, my experiences. And so we were playing the believing game with all of these ideas, but we're trying to play it as earnestly as possible, if that makes sense. And so there was, I think, there's like a little bit of a tension there, and that it is a game, we are just kind of playing it, but it does also have consequences. And that was something that we struggled with for, a little while, and like still struggle with, actually. Reece Sellers-Mitchell wonders how you incorporate the believing game into debate and potentially changing someone's mind, at least I assume. And I would say really it's, first step, like we've been talking about, is to play the game, try to figure out what, from two perspectives, try to figure out what is virtuous about the idea, if anything, but then also attempt to just, inhabit it to figure out why someone might believe this sort of thing. Try to have their experience of their own ideas so that when you do actually meet them on the field of debate, you are able to accurately and earnestly summarize their position so that they know that you know where they're coming from. But so as far as, incorporating empathy into the next step, into maybe potentially trying to get them to change their views, it's super difficult, and there's a lot of research about this that's super interesting. But basically, changing someone's mind, especially when it's like a political topic, is you're gonna fail. I think it's something like 80% of the time. You're not gonna be able to change someone's mind. But that the situations where people do change their mind, it tends to go something like this, at least as far as I understand it. That what you have to do is you just ask them questions about why they believe what they believe, try to demonstrate an understanding of their beliefs, and then at the same time explain why it is you believe what you believe. And that attacking someone and saying that that what they believe is wrong because look at the figures, or because you're not being reasonable or you're not being logical, is gonna just make them hold on to that belief even stronger. But that when you get them to talk about it and you get them to discuss it on their own terms and explain how they arrived while talking about how you have arrived at your competing belief, that is the thing that has the highest chance of changing their mind, of convincing them that otherwise might be the case. So I think that is not necessarily the believing game, but it is something that, having played the believing game before that point, might allow you to have a more earnest and meaningful conversation. Renato, sup, and thank you for the kind words. I've said this before, but I want to say it again, and I want to, I don't know, I just feel like it bears repeating that. We've gotten a lot of really nice messages and a lot of really nice comments from people talking about the impact that the show has had on them over the years. And it means more than I could possibly effectively communicate in a comment response video or on video in general. It is legitimately overwhelming. And I also want to say that likewise, that we would never, I think, have expected to reach as many people as we did, but I also don't think we ever would have expected to be as deeply affected by as many people as we were. And that it really is a two-way street. And so, thank you for, being open, I guess, to the ideas that we shared, but then also thank you for, thank you for writing this comment, and thank you to everybody else for writing a comment, for clicking the thumbs up, for saying hey on Twitter, for sharing your ideas, for sending me emails. Like, it's, we may have had a lot of impact on you, but I want to make it as abundantly clear as I possibly can that you all had a massive impact on us. So thanks. Brandon, done. As far as not going though, I mean, you know what they say. It's better to have idea'd and lost than to have never idea'd at all. That's how that goes, right? Charlotte Rook just writes a really amazing comment about critical thought being something akin to a governor, like what you would find maybe on, something that has an engine in it. And yeah, I just want to point this out to say this is a great comment, and also to read one part of it, which is that, so the conceptual frameworks that a person uses to understand and navigate the world are a part of that person, and thus the importance of picking tools of radical empathy and solidarity rather than bigotry. And I just want to say that that's, like, couldn't have said it better myself. I really like it. Links to this comment and all the others in the doobly-doo. Travis, I can think of no better thanks for all the thinks than for having our thinks included in some of your thinks. And then, so I guess what I'm trying to say is thanks for your thinks in response to our thinks. No thanks necessary. Piatos, yes, absolutely. You can definitely be the last comment. But this is not going to be the last thing we do on our last upload. The last thing I want to do is thank everybody who worked on the show. Everybody who just really labored with their entire heart and mind to make it what it was over the last 5 years. I would love to get everybody here on camera, but unfortunately, not everybody works in New York. And a lot of people have worked on the show over the years, and I want to be able to thank everyone, whether or not they still work on the show. So I'm gonna thank everyone by name. I'm gonna try to get everybody, but I'm sure that there are people who I have forgotten. So if you should be on this list but you're not, I'm deeply sorry. But I do want to thank Morgan Crossley, Ben Cheek, Eric Brown, Andrew Kornhaber, Lisa Romagnoli, Brian Gaynor, Ian Jenkins, BJ Clofus, Kyle Cookstell, James Bolenbaugh, Eric Browse, Leah Ordonia, Kristen Williamson, Scott Pearson, Brian Nils Johnson, Mike Petro, Louis Lalire, Patrick Davison, Ollie Leonard, The Lit Crit Guy, George Ruiz, Lauren Sachs, Brandon Arolfo, Mats Graham, and Vree, Danielle Steinberg, Ray Money Schill, Kelsey Savage, and Leslie Datsess. And no doubt a few other people that I forgot, but also, of course, you, our audience. Doubly so if you just sat through that long list of names. It has been quite a ride. I hope after this, I will see you around our hometown of the internet. As many people have said to me, so long. Thanks for all the thinks. DFTBA, and Jai for life.